Nigeria's debt burden is coming under fresh scrutiny after the federal government spent 3.14 trillion naira servicing its domestic debt in just the first 3 months of 2026. Data from the Debt Management Office shows that 2.97 trillion naira of that amount went to interest payments, while 169.68 billion naira covered principal repayments. And the pace of spending accelerated significantly through the quarter from 741.82 billion naira in January to 967.67 billion naira in February, before hitting 1.43 trillion naira in March alone.
What makes the figure particularly significant is that 2.97 trillion naira, about 94.6% of the total, went to interest payments rather than paying down the principal. The government paid 1.96 trillion naira in interest on federal government bonds and about 1 trillion naira on treasury bills, with Nigeria's public debt now at 159.35 trillion naira. The federal government is projecting $11.6 billion in debt service cost for 2026. The pressure on the government finances is becoming harder to ignore. The question is how much of Nigeria's revenue is being consumed by the cost of existing debt, and does that leave room for development and essential public services?
Well, to help us make sense of these figures and what they mean for Nigeria's economy, we're joined by economist Dr. Simon Samson. Dr. Simon, thank you so much for making it a date with us.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
All right, good morning. 3.14 trillion naira spent servicing domestic debt. I mean, in just 3 months. What do you make of that? Isn't that a huge figure? And at what point does debt servicing become a serious threat to the government's ability to fund the economy rather than simply a normal cost of borrowing?
Nigeria has the huge problem of debt servicing. It has been a problem for a while. At the time, we were even doing 96% of government revenue in debt servicing. So the numbers have even improved a little bit under the current government, but it's not yet the whole, because we're still doing way above the ceiling that has been recommended by the IMF. What is recommended for an economy like ours is 30% of your revenue at most should be used for debt servicing. With the in recent times, particularly under this government, the best we have had is 40.8%. And now it has even exceeded that. We're doing more than 50% of our revenue in debt servicing. It's a huge problem. It's a big problem for Nigeria. And that's why sometimes our leaders will tell you that because if you juxtapose the debt service to revenue ratio, which we're doing badly, to the debt stock to GDP, which we are not doing badly there. If you look at, in terms of if you find the ratio of our debt stock per GDP, we're doing something less than 40%, which is moderately okay. So the problem is actually debt service, and that's why many people in government have been claiming that Nigeria has a revenue problem, not a debt problem. But if you ask me, it's both ways, because these debts are accumulating, and by the way, our debts are not low, they're just moderate. So we're not in the all clear. We're still not doing perfectly okay when it comes to debt stock. But the major problem is debt service. And people like Taiwo Oyedele were brought into government to see how we can shore up government revenue. Sadly, we're still struggling to even meet the revenue targets for the budget, let alone to even bring down these debt burdens.
Oftentimes, the government always cites GDP to debt ratio, saying, you know, we're not as bad as other countries that are borrowing more. They'll point to the example of the United States. Does that hold water? And as we speak, there are talks of the government going to shop for more borrowing. Why do we need, what's the need to borrow? What can we do differently to reduce this debt burden? Because it's getting to an alarming level.
Well, I think it's disingenuous to compare Nigeria with America. America has the reserve currency of the world. The dollar is responsible for 2/3 to 3/4 of the reserve currency of countries around the world. So they have this advantage, an unfair advantage, as some people call it. The same way with Nigeria, when it comes to clearing our domestic debt, it is going to do harm to the economy, of course, but the Nigerian government cannot default in paying back domestic revenue since it has a central bank and is a domestic currency that they can print the way they were doing under Buhari. Even though it may be an abuse of the law, but we know how things are done here. But the major problem is the external debt, which is in dollars, and we don't have the capacity to print dollars. We have to earn these dollars, whether by export or by remittances or by investment or any other means that we can generate, which is not within our powers. So we should not be comparing ourselves to the United States. Then, even though the United States is having debt burden, debt stock to GDP of more than 100%, and we're doing less than 40%, we are still disadvantaged because, as some people normally say, this GDP doesn't pay back debts. It's actually use your revenue to pay back what you're owing. For the United States, the debt service is next to nothing, at least compared to what we're having in Nigeria. So it's a huge problem for us, and we shouldn't always be bringing up the fact that our debt stock to GDP is okay, because that is not the problem.
GDP doesn't pay debt, as you said. So what do we need to do to improve our debt burden?
Everybody borrows, so we cannot say that we'll stop borrowing, but it should be done in a sustainable way. And then we have to tackle the problem of debt servicing. We have to find ways to generate more revenue. We have to find ways for the government to generate more income. And I'm not asking the government to increase tax rates or increase tax burden on Nigerians. They have to widen the tax net. They have to make sure that the tax administration is as efficient, as cost-effective as possible, so that every time that is being earned through taxation is being utilized and not being wasted along the way. So if we have this major problem of tax revenue to GDP, which is around 10%, and is bad, even compared to our West African peers. We're doing terribly badly when it comes to that. We need to do something about it. And by the way, I have to emphasize, I'm not asking the government to increase tax rates or to increase tax burdens on Nigeria. There are different mechanisms you can use to show up your revenue without punishing the people that are enduring so much poverty.
Conversation about increase in tax. Let's talk about the spending jump.
Electricity tariff is going off.
Yeah,
well, fair point. And chances are we'll see it in other areas. Spending has jumped sharply. It's reaching now 1.43 trillion in March alone. What could have explained that sudden spike? And does this maybe suggest that the government's debt to service burden could become even heavier as the year progresses?
Well, the servicing of these debts, it might have increased quarter on quarter, but on the whole, we're not doing way higher than a lot, if you juxtapose that with previous recent quarters. We're not doing so badly. The debt servicing percentage for this year is expected to inch up maybe by 50 basis points compared to last year. But compared to 2024, it has actually ballooned from 40.8 to 53.7. So, and according to projections by IMF and World Bank and others, it's expected to even reduce slightly by next year, maybe to 53.4 or so. So I don't think the jump should, I don't think is something that we expected to reoccur, unless if something out of the blue happens. But if the current trajectory is to be maintained, that is, we're even expecting it to ease a little bit by next year.
Okay, so in other words, let's just, let me ask, two-part question. First question, should Nigerians panic? Should Nigerians panic? Because everyone hearing since over the weekend, Nigerians are reactive. They're talking about how it's going to be a tougher economy. So should Nigerians panic, if at all?
I don't think panic is the right word to use.
Okay.
Should we be worried?
We should be concerned. We should be concerned that the debt burden is particularly the debt servicing is getting out of hand. And if the more money you dedicate to servicing your debt, the less money you have for most important things like education, healthcare, infrastructure, and social safety nets. So I think we should be a little bit concerned that we're spending more money servicing debts. And what is even sad is that virtually everything that we use for debt servicing is used to only pay the interest. We are hardly touching the principal. That is a major concern. Maybe we should panic about that particular one, that the entire money being used to service debt is just to pay interest. Almost everything, 94.6%. So technically, we are not even paying back the principal. And I know there's this, we have news around that the Tinubu's government has doubled our debt, if you look at it in terms of naira. And then if people in government want to downplay it, they put it in terms of dollars. I think all of them, I think both sides have been disingenuous in the sense that I think domestic debt should be indicated in naira, while foreign or external debt should be in dollars. And if you look at the two like that, it may not seem as bad compared to the naira value, which has gone from around 30 trillion in the first quarter of 2023, 30 trillion, we're talking about 159 now. So it has increased by more than times 5. But if you look at it in terms, in dollar terms, the increase is just by less than 2 billion. So I think if you look at it both ways, you're not just really being straightforward. So for the domestic debt, it has increased from 30 trillion to 87.4, which is an increase of 57 trillion, which is not good. But if you look at it in terms of external debt, it has gone in the first quarter of 2023 to the first quarter of 2026. It has gone from 42 billion to 51 billion, which is an increase of around 9 billion. So for the domestic debt, I think, and if you look at the ballooning, particularly in 2023, was because of the ways and means loans that the previous government borrowed that was that was added to the debt stock. So it's not like Tinubu actually borrowed this money. A lot of the borrowing was done before he came. And to be fair to him, if you incorporate that ways and means, the debt stock on his watch, the domestic debt stock, has increased by something in the region of 20 trillion. So 20 trillion domestically, and then 9 billion in external debt doesn't seem as bad as people using the naira value, and doesn't seem as good as people using the dollar value of the total debt stock.
Now, Dr. Samson, you mentioned that word, the principle, that this huge amount of taxpayers' funds is only going to pay the interest, rather, not even touching the principal. And this is quite alarming. It's almost like we borrowed money from loan sharks and we're going to forever be in this debt cycle. Please, can you educate our viewers on, if we're paying trillions and billions on the interest, when are we going to now get to the principal? Because it seems like we're only scratching the surface. And the second part of my question is, in the past, we got a Paris debt cancellation, relief under President Obasanjo. And since then, we've been facing issues of climate change, COVID, things that we didn't bring upon ourselves, that, force measures. We've also had the Russia-Ukraine crisis, we've had the Iran war, and all of this. Won't that make a good case for us to please go and beg them again that please, can you forgive us for we know what we're doing?
Well, in terms of the first part of your question, in terms of servicing our debt, I think, like I mentioned earlier, it's really a cost. Let me use your word now. If you panic about that, it's not good, it's indicting, and it means we're digging ourselves further into a hole.
Is it the conditions of the loans? Because I don't understand. If you're paying back interest, at what point will you get to the principal?
Well, that means you have to do more to not only clear the interest, but to pay the principal. So we have to do more in terms of our debt side. But for now, I think the government is trying to postpone this payment. They want to deploy as much resources as possible to tackle problems. Because if you're trying to pay back the principal as much as you want, it means less and less money for you to do anything as a government. So they're trying to delay that part in a bid to solve problems domestically, hoping that things will improve and they'll be able to pay the principal down the line. But it's kicking the can down the road. And that responsibility might not even be on the current government. They may be out of power when people will be struggling to pay back the principal. So it is not really good if you look at it. It's just delaying the evil day. So we should do everything possible to pay back the principal as well as interest in a bid to make ourselves better when it comes to our credit rating and better when it comes to terms of our loans when we borrow from either bilaterally or multilaterally, or even from by commercial means. If you look at the borrowing commercially, has larger interests, which we tend to do a lot of now. And I think we should, as much as possible, reduce that because it's making the interest to be completely out of hand. Then the second part of your question, remind me, please. The second part of the
debt
question.
forgiveness.
The debt forgiveness, yes. We did that under Obasanjo, and I think we enjoyed it for a little bit. But even at that time, I remember many people were skeptical. They were afraid that if the debts will be forgiven, the money that should have been paid back will not be utilized efficiently. And sadly, that is exactly what happened largely. We became irresponsible again in terms of recklessly borrowing, in the sense that we borrow and we hardly see tangible results for this borrowing. What we see is not commensurate to the lots of money that we have borrowed. So I think the world will even be more skeptical now than they were under Obasanjo 2005, 2006, 2007, when those loans were cancelled. So we have to really bring our persuasive powers. We have to deploy all our persuasive powers, convince them why what happened 20 years ago when the debt was cancelled, we embarked on borrowing sprees and accumulated so much debt that the same thing will not be repeated, and the Nigerian people will really feel the impact of debt forgiveness this time around. But it's going to be more Herculean, it's going to be more difficult than when it happened under Obasanjo. And we had somebody like Okonjo-Iweala then. I don't think we have somebody like that in this government that can actually approach these lenders and convince them. I don't think we have such a person with the charisma, with the gravitas, convince the world that, yes, you can actually forgive our debts and you can be rest assured that this money will be used well and it will impact the Nigerian people.
Convincing is one thing, and the optics is the other. Because the world is much more like a global village than what it was back then with the advent of social media, I'm sure.
You can't believe in larger than life.
Exactly. These loaners can actually see what is being done and how the citizens are reacting to it. But I have a two-part question I want you to answer very quickly as soon as you can, because we're running out of time. Just recently, we also have the issue of oil-backed loan refinancing. I'm sure you're also aware of that. From the time of the former late President Muhammadu Buhari down to now, we're also told that there has been an approval for the borrowing of over $4.5 billion again, using Nigeria's oil reserves to do that, per day, per barrel, rather. That's one. How can this impact on the current situation we're faced with now, using oil for exchange in terms of borrowing? Secondly, the CBN also continues to celebrate its foreign exchange reserves. I mean, we're celebrating that we surpassed 52.5 billion in July. Why are we celebrating the foreign reserves and yet it's not impactful in the lives of every single Nigerian? I mean, let's see if you can break that down, especially for the man who's watching from home and needs to understand why.
Well, recently, NEC, Nigeria Economic Council, sat and decided to refinance Project Gazelle. We got this some years ago, and the reason why we got this crude oil-backed loan was because we wanted to clear backlog of foreign exchange that the Nigerian state was not able to provide for investors. And that was affecting our credit rating, that was affecting investment, and they also wanted to build up our foreign exchange reserves. And I think they have succeeded in that regard. I cannot attribute it largely to that. I cannot say that's the reason why the foreign exchange reserves got better and we're largely able to clear the backlog. But I know that the reason why they borrowed the money, those problems are largely tackled. We have almost cleared all the backlog except for some questionable ones. Then in terms of our foreign exchange reserves, we're doing net reserves of 3 billion at that time. We're talking about more than 40 billion now. And even if you look at the gross reserves, we have done incredibly well for ourselves. So now that they are refinancing this particular loan, and the reasons given are the same foreign exchange reserves, and then there's an added one which is about infrastructure. So we just hope that this money will be used for the purposes for which they are meant for. And that we're going to see results the way we saw results the last time this Project Gazelle loan was embarked upon. Then for the foreign exchange reserves, these foreign exchange reserves are buffers. The Nigerian state uses it to show that it has the capacity to meet up with its obligations. That improves credit rating. That makes us able to borrow on favorable terms, more favorable terms than before. And it means that investors also will be less scared because investment is a coward, is afraid of taking so much risk. So it's demonstrating to these investors that they have less worry because our foreign exchange reserves are bigger and bigger. And we're able to meet up with our import bills too. So Nigerians might say that they are not seeing results of these bigger foreign exchange reserves, but the truth is the results are there. Our exchange rate is largely stable. And one of the reasons is because of the foreign exchange reserves. Maybe we would have exceeded the 2,000 that we are approaching when Tinubu came to power. And we are doing largely within the band that is largely stable. So it's because, one reason is because of the foreign exchange reserves too. So Nigerians might say that maybe poverty has increased, misery has increased, but I think that's about the translation of some of these economic wins that the Tinubu government has seen. I think they need to do more to make sure that all these things are translating to better lives for all Nigerians. They have to be intentional. They should not wait for market forces to trickle down some of these benefits.
Well, thank you so much for joining us this morning, Doctor. We look forward to more conversations and we'll continue to track the development of the story. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.